Story 1. Bats are not blind. Their eyesight is just fine, but since they are primarily nocturnal, they may rely more on other senses, for example echolocation, to navigate. Story 2. The year 2000 problem was not a hoax or overblown hype. I was a computer controls engineer at a large chemical plant. Our main control room computers would definitely have failed due to the year 2000 problem if they had not received software or hardware upgrades. We would have lost control of 150 huge vessels full of hot, corrosive chemicals. Story 3. I want to flip a table every time I hear people say orcas are actually dolphins, not whales. Orcas are dolphins, and all dolphins are toothed whales. All dolphins are whales, but not all whales are dolphins. Orca is not a less offensive term for killer whale. Ursinus orca roughly translates to demon of the sea. Orcas would not care about our human opinions. They would probably embrace the name killer whale, since they are aggressive, highly intelligent predators. Story 4. For the last 39 years, I have worked as an American Sign Language interpreter. I cannot even spell my name in British Sign Language. Story 5. Security guard. That closed-circuit television you think is keeping an eye on your safety? Chances are it broke years ago, and they could not be bothered to send a contractor to fix it. I have never worked in a facility with more than 60% of cameras operational. Story 6. Urine is not sterile, but it is about 1,000,000 times safer to consume than feces. Never ingest feces. Story 7. Parliament did not arise in England because of a popular yearning for representation and involvement in decisions. It was a top-down recruitment of local people to help the king understand what was happening in his kingdom. Story 8. The Middle Ages were not characterized by universal ignorance, constantly muddy or filthy streets, or pervasive superstition. Story 9. Knitting and crochet are not the same and are not interchangeable. Crochet uses one hook. Knitting uses 2 or more needles, as when knitting in the round. Story 10. Monosodium glutamate is the sodium salt of glutamic acid. Glutamic acid occurs naturally in foods such as tomatoes and mushrooms. Monosodium glutamate is not more harmful than table salt. In fact, it is less harmful because it is used much more sparingly. You can buy monosodium glutamate at Walmart in a shaker called Accent in the seasoning aisle. It is pure monosodium glutamate. Use a small amount in savory dishes and you will be surprised at how much better they taste. I understand how nerdy or countercultural it might sound to support monosodium glutamate, but the misinformation and ignorance on the subject never fail to amaze me. Once I brought a few small vials to a coworker who was curious to try it. A little goes a long way, so it lasts a very long time. I gave one vial to the store manager and asked if he had ever wondered what pure monosodium glutamate tastes like. He screamed, "Are you trying to kill me?" He thought I was dispensing poison, even though he sells the product in aisle 10. Story 11. Corsets and stays were said to be extremely tight, making it hard to breathe and uncomfortable. If someone practiced tight lacing, they could be uncomfortable, but most women did not do that on a daily basis. I made one, and it felt comfortable and supportive to wear. Story 12. Blacksmiths do not work in molten steel. Molten implies the metal is a liquid, which it is not at any point in the forging process. Also, red hot is not that hot. Red is the color where you usually want to stop hammering. I wish people would say white hot more often, because that is as hot as you can get the metal before it burns. Ironically, the comments have revealed another misconception that infuriates me. Sword making is not inherently impressive. It is not even sophisticated from a forging perspective. Everything a blacksmith makes starts life as a bar. The less bar-like the final product is, the harder it is to forge. Story 13. Hi. I'm a retired criminal based in the United States. Miranda writes, "An arrest does not require that you be read them. They apply when you are in custody and about to be interrogated. At that point, you should say you want a lawyer. Do not consent to searches. Some say they will search anyway, so cooperate. But refusing consent is not primarily to stop the search. It preserves your lawyer's ability to challenge the search's justification later. Regarding sexual assault in jail or prison, it is discussed a lot online, but it does not occur as often as many claim. If it were that common, there would be little time for anything else. Also, if you have contraband, you are not required to hide it in your rectum. If you consent to a search and later are jailed and hide contraband in your body, others will react with confusion. Being tough on crime does not solve the underlying problems. We need to be smart on crime by understanding and addressing the causes of crime to prevent recidivism and reduce crime. I did not retire because people locked me up. I changed because a family member privately funded the help I needed. Most people in the system do not have that opportunity. During incarceration, I learned to read for pleasure, developed a more aggressive style of basketball, improved observation skills, and learned methods of concealing items. If you are proud as a taxpayer that your contribution helped me learn to read, speak up. Story 14. I am a criminal lawyer. There are many misinterpretations and misunderstandings of the law. The underlying issue is that law is about language and uses words that reasonably educated people know in a colloquial context. So many assume they can figure things out themselves without appreciating that legal terms have precise meanings. My biggest pet peeve is the invocation of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, terms that vary by jurisdiction, to suggest there should be no social or professional consequences for speech, rather than appreciating that these protections refer to state interference with speech. You do not need to be an expert or a lawyer to know that is wrong. A common misconception I encounter in practice is that when someone is introduced as a criminal defense lawyer, the first question is almost always, how do you defend someone you know to be guilty? The premise that it is harder to defend guilty people gets it entirely backwards. Defending factually, legally, or morally innocent people is a much greater psychological burden. It creates deep investment in the files and outcomes, keeps you up at night wondering what else you could have done, and triggers an inner voice telling you you are not good enough. Defending guilty people is easier. Try to plea them out with a favorable deal, or set the case for trial and argue the state has not proven its case. Ensure procedural rights are protected and sentences are fair. Story 15. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is not a personality trait. Brain chemicals do not interact correctly. Abnormalities in brain structure and functional connectivity that are consistently linked to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can be seen on brain scans. Yes, it is hereditary. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder doubles the risk of death in children and adults. Adults with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are 8 times more likely to die by suicide. It is legitimately dangerous for people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder to be undiagnosed and untreated. Stimulant medications were approved for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because the risks of untreated disorder are greater than the risks of medication. That is the hill I will die on. Story 16. Information technology. Identifiers in domain names are read right to left. The leftmost label is the most specific, and the rightmost label is the most general. For example, Siberia.google.com is a Siberia under the Google domain, while google.siberia.com is likely hosted on a completely different server. This distinction is important for recognizing well-crafted phishing pages. Story 17. Electroconvulsive therapy, also called shock therapy, is not used as a punishment for misbehaving patients. It is performed only under general anesthesia and is used to treat major depression and other psychiatric conditions that are resistant to other types of treatment. Most patients report feeling euphoric afterward and notice immediate improvement. Story 18. Damascus or pattern-welded steel is not inherently better, nor does it have mystical properties. Historically, in early steel production, it was one of the few ways a smith could manipulate carbon content. The layered effect was simply a byproduct. Modern pattern welding is done because it looks attractive and people appreciate the skill and artistry of a smith who can do it well. To oversimplify, if a Damascus billet has 1,000 layers, that is 1,000 welds that could be imperfect. Pattern welded steel typically combines at least 2 different alloys that may require slightly different heat treatment, and time in the forge can introduce grain growth and carbon loss or migration. Modern monosteel is almost always easier to heat treat, grind, and get predictable results. It is fun to make, use, and look at, but modern monosteels are better in every respect except appearance. Story 19. In most jobs in the United States, It is illegal for an employer to ask employees not to discuss their wages, or to say that discussing wages is unprofessional or illegal. A written policy forbidding wage discussions is also illegal. Story 20. Ancient Egyptians did not worship cats. Cats were considered sacred, seen as links between the earthly plane and the divine plane, and were sometimes believed to be inhabited by gods. That is like saying Christians worship the crucifix. They do not, but it is an important symbol of their faith. Similarly, the claim that slaves built the pyramids is incorrect. Although some slaves were used, most pyramid builders were Egyptian citizens. Ancient Egyptians had a labor tax. Instead of paying money, people provided manual labor, and farmers gave part of their harvest. Story 21. I am a medieval historian who focuses on food habits. There is a common misconception that the numeric year, for example 1325 Anno Domini, did not change until around Easter or around March 25th each year. Therefore, what we would consider February 23rd, 1325 by modern calendars would have been February 23rd, 1324 in medieval calendars, since that date falls before Easter or March 25th. This is known as the Old Style and New Style dating system. Major efforts to clean up the system were made in different areas of Europe throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. However, when I go to museums and attend public history events, I notice the concept is often applied too liberally to pre-1800 European and North American history. My specialty is French, English, and Latin diet accounts from French and English noble households, 1350 to 1650. I prefer long runs of accounts, the same household with daily entries for at least a few months. Diet accounts were fairly formulaic across the centuries and essentially consist of a date, lists of all ingredients entering the kitchen on a given day, the cost of each ingredient, and often the source of the ingredient, for example from a manor, from the cellar, or from town. I have yet to find a diet account from a French or English noble household, 1350 to 1650, in which the clerk changed the year at Easter or on March 25th. In the manuscripts I work with, the numeric year always changes on January 1st. Because I can see the volumes of foodstuffs entering the kitchen, it is possible to identify when the household held major feasts. January 1st was always a major feast day. It is true that January 1st falls within the 12 days of Christmas, but it consistently shows a significantly greater list of foodstuffs than most of the other 12 days. Households typically feasted only on Christmas, New Year's Day, and Epiphany during that period. January 1st saw two competing religious feasts during the Middle Ages, the Feast of the Circumcision and the Solemnity of the Virgin Mary. From a food perspective, the January 1st feasts are somewhat different from other major religious feast days. Major religious feasts were always preceded directly by a fast in the diet accounts, periods when only fish and vegetables were consumed. Beef, pork, poultry, game, butter, and similar foods were not used on fast days. January 1st is never preceded by a fast unless it fell on a regular weekly fast day such as Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday. In that period, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays were weekly fast days unless a religious feast fell on them. For example, if Easter fell on a Saturday, it would be treated as a meat day. Therefore, from a food perspective, January 1st seems to have operated as a standalone feast day with a slightly less religious overtone than other major feasts that were preceded by fasting. I am not saying that old-style dating did not exist. It did. It was used inconsistently across Europe and even regionally or in different sectors. Monasteries, for example, might have used it more than other institutions within the same region before 1800. However, many unconnected places in 14th through 17th century Europe were already using what we consider the New Style calendar. New Year celebrations largely took place on January 1st. March 25th is almost never a feast day in the diet accounts. Therefore, if you hear someone, even a professor, say that a date in the 1600s must be considered Old Style, know that Old Style dating was not universally used across the medieval and early modern periods. We need to analyze the context of the source to date it properly. Story 22. Climate change means the climate is changing. The planet is generally warming, but the larger effect is an increase in extreme weather. Average rainy seasons are becoming less reliable, with regions experiencing either drought or torrential rains. Some people say the snowpack in Antarctica and Greenland is larger, but that is mostly due to melting and spreading. While the snow may cover a greater area, the snowpack itself is shallower. Scientists can estimate past carbon dioxide concentrations from ice cores, so climate scientists are not making numbers up when they say atmospheric carbon dioxide has increased rapidly since the Industrial Revolution. Story 23. Some people say glass is a liquid. Glass is not a liquid. It is an amorphous solid. Amorphous means it has a non-crystalline structure and does not imply flow at any noticeable rate over a few hundred years. The myth comes from old windows that are thicker at the bottom. They were simply installed that way. For glass to flow enough to become thicker at the bottom would take longer than the age of the universe. Story 24. Wanting to keep your desk neat is not obsessive-compulsive disorder. You probably do not have it. Approximately 80 million people worldwide have the disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is not a quirk. It is a mental illness that is debilitating. Story 25. You cannot smell or taste the active chlorine in your tap water. You can only detect the byproducts formed when chlorine reacts with other organic matter. Note: if you can smell chlorine, your water needs more chlorine, not less. Story 26. When it comes to local politics, 9 times out of 10 the politician you want is not the one shouting about how they are going to change the system or fight for the people. You may want those things at the national or regional level, but at the local level it matters far more that the school board gets its budget approved smoothly or that the local fire station has funds to replace an aging truck than any grand political affiliation. Anyone who leans heavily on party affiliation, especially if they are in the majority party, likely has little idea what they are doing or is corrupt and trying to distract you with big issues they will never address or will address and create a needless mess. This applies everywhere, not just the United States. In local politics, the important thing is having people who can get things done with minimal corruption rather than pursuing broader ideological battles. Story 27. Having schizophrenia does not make you a knife-wielding maniac by default. Being diagnosed with schizophrenia actually increases the risk of becoming a victim of serious crime. It is not like the movies. In reality, life can be lonelier and filled with symptoms and challenges that are less understood even by doctors. Negative symptoms such as anhedonia and avolition can be crippling. Story 28. Genuine leather is not a high-grade type of leather. Genuine means it is technically leather, but it is often corrected grain, where the top surface has been sanded or split and a synthetic topping is added. That topping looks perfect but will not wear nicely. Full-grain leather is what you want. Story 29. The McDonald's coffee lawsuit was not a cash grab. The coffee was excessively hot, and the woman, Stella Liebeck, had parked and placed the cup between her legs to add cream and sugar. It spilled and burned her so badly it fused her labia together and caused third-degree burns. She wanted her medical bills paid, but McDonald's refused. The large award reflected the jury's decision to punish McDonald's and send a message. It equaled 2 days of McDonald's coffee sales. Story 30. A few points. First, when a grenade detonates, it is not a 55-gallon oil drum explosion. It produces a brief puff of smoke and may produce an instant flash, but there is no Hollywood-style fireball. Second, removing a magazine from a firearm does not make it safe. A round may still be in the chamber. Third, firearms do not simply discharge when dropped, and certainly not as in the film True Lies when a submachine gun bounces down the stairs and empties the entire magazine. Story 31. This is a small point. The bacteria in cow stomachs do not help them digest grass in the sense of breaking down cellulose and passing the nutrients on or converting it into protein and secreting it. Instead, the cow swallows grass and uses it to feed the bacteria, which multiply like a broth culture. The cow then gains nutrition by digesting the bacteria in its true stomach. Just as cows do not help humans digest grass by eating it and becoming our food, bacteria do not help cattle digest grass. Story 32. Quantum teleportation sounds like a process in which matter or energy vanishes from one place and instantly reappears at another using some nebulous quantum process. In reality, what is transmitted is information, and it cannot travel instantaneously. In this context, the terms have specific meanings that differ from everyday usage. Information is a quantity related to the possible states or configurations of a system. Information can be classical or quantum, depending on whether it describes a classical or quantum system. Classical information is measured in bits and quantum information in qubits. Quantum teleportation is the name of a protocol for sending qubits using a communication channel designed for bits. Normally, you need a special quantum communication channel to send quantum information. If you first distribute the two halves of an entangled pair of qubits through a quantum channel and then close that channel, you can later use a classical channel to transmit any qubit between the two locations by exploiting the correlations created when the entangled pair was prepared. Crucially, something must still be sent through a physical channel at speeds below the speed of light for the protocol to work. No matter what one believes about entanglement or instantaneous effects, the entangled relationship cannot be used to achieve any measurable or meaningful result without a step that operates below the speed of light. Story 33. The Bible never says that the forbidden fruit was an apple. The Bible also does not say how many wise men or kings visited Jesus. There were 3 gifts, which is likely why people assume there were 3 wise men. Satan is not a personal name but a title meaning the opposer or adversary. The serpent is described as a Satan, which does not necessarily mean the devil himself. There are many misconceptions about Satan and Lucifer. Story 34. Bipolar disorder does not mean that a person changes completely from one minute to the next. Episodes of mania, hypomania, or depression typically last weeks or months. Even in rapid cycling or mixed episodes, mood shifts are not as sudden or extreme as commonly believed. Volatile mood swings are more indicative of other mood or emotion regulation disorders such as borderline personality disorder. Even mental health professionals may not fully understand bipolar disorder without experience treating it. Many were exposed to the same misconceptions before graduate school and may still hold them unless they have actively corrected them. If you or someone you know has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, do not accept a single professional's opinion as definitive unless that clinician is highly experienced with the condition. Bipolar disorder is frequently misdiagnosed. Best practice is to avoid assigning a definitive chronic diagnosis until all diagnostic criteria have been observed, which can take months for bipolar disorder. After a first 1-week inpatient stay, clinicians should generally limit conclusions to provisional or unspecified diagnoses rather than a long-term label. Also, borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder are distinct. Bipolar disorder is classified as bipolar I disorder or bipolar II disorder. Story 35. True food poisoning is not usually associated with the last meal. It is more likely linked to a meal consumed 24 to 72 hours before symptom onset. Story 36. Einstein merely endorsed the letter addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt by signing it, which helped start the Manhattan Project. Story 37. The claim that a jumbo jet's worth of people die from medical errors every day, and that medical errors are the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States, is false. This claim is based on a single study from 30 years ago with several serious flaws. For instance, many data sources were tiny samples of very niche populations, including very sick patients, which were then inappropriately extrapolated to the entire United States population. The study did not distinguish between patients who died of a medical error and those who died with a medical error. In other words, investigators did not determine whether a reported error actually contributed to the patient's death. For example, if a patient with terminal cancer was accidentally given 2 ibuprofen tablets instead of 3 and died the next day, that death was counted as due to a medical error. The definition of an error was overly broad and included known adverse side effects of medications. Side effects are not errors. Clinicians are aware of the risks and prescribe medications when the benefits outweigh the risks. There are many other flaws in that study, but those are the major ones. See the McGill article on this topic to learn more. Story 38. I just want to say this is an excellent question, and I am enjoying many of the answers. Thanks, original poster. Story 39. A common misconception is that history is written by the victors. In reality, history is written by cultures with a tradition of literary expression. Athens lost the Peloponnesian War, yet our main source for that war is an Athenian writer. The Chinese lost the war against the Manchus and the Ming dynasty fell, but our sources for that conflict are Chinese writers. The Byzantine Empire was defeated in 1453, when Constantinople was taken by the Ottomans. A key account of that siege comes from a Byzantine author. Story 40. You do not need to exercise vigorously to lose weight. Weight loss is 99% diet. I have lost 128 pounds without exercising. Story 41. Poison dart frogs are only toxic when given the right diet. In the wild, they eat fire ants and other toxic insects, which allows them to sequester the insect's toxins and incorporate them into their skin. When fed non-toxic prey such as crickets in captivity, they are generally safe to handle. Story 42. Nuclear energy is one of the safest and cleanest energy sources. There are numerous regulations and multiple redundant backups to ensure accidents do not occur. Tens to hundreds of coal plant accidents occur each year without much public attention. But the 3 nuclear mishaps in the past 50 years have damaged the industry's public image. Story 43. Sparta actually has a terrible military record. I saw a book the other day that said on the back cover, when Philip II told Sparta that if he broke through their walls, he would banish them from the lands they had held for centuries and they would never rise again, all Sparta sent in reply was if. What the anecdote fails to mention is that Philip II did break through their walls, banish them from the lands they had held for centuries, and they never rose again. Also, the Persian Empire is often seen as a villain and an evil empire, when in practice it was one of the more morally upright empires to have existed. It was not perfect, but it was much better than many other empires. Story 44. Many feminine fashions originated with men. Heels were invented so men could mount their horses more easily. They began as heeled boots. Corsets began as men's garments because they helped with posture and provided back support while riding. The color pink was once considered masculine because washed blood-stained clothing could take on a pink hue. The pinker your clothes, the more deadly you were considered. Many gendered clothing norms date from the early 1900s. Women who adopted these styles tended to be wealthy and could afford the social outcry. Dressing that way was a means to command attention in mixed company and to signal status. It was also a way for queens, princesses, and other royalty to show those of lesser status how much privilege they wielded. Think of it as Instagram in real life. Story 45. Unfortunately, yelling at me doesn't make your food cook faster. Story 46. As someone who studied physics and considered pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy degree, I dislike the trope that geniuses hold multiple Doctor of Philosophy degrees. A Doctor of Philosophy is essentially proof that you can do research and defend your conclusions coherently. After earning one, you conduct research. Even if you change fields, for example from astrophysics to fluid dynamics, you can complete a master's degree to learn the subject, but you will probably read papers and then start your own research. That is like saying a racing driver is a good driver because they have taken their driving test many times. It is nonsensical. If you want a highly intelligent character, give them one Doctor of Philosophy degree and many written and collaborative research publications or books in their field. Almost no one has multiple Doctor of Philosophy degrees in real life. For one thing, a Doctor of Philosophy usually takes at least 4 years. Pursuing additional Doctor of Philosophy degrees would be a poor use of time that could be spent doing research, obtaining tenure, or other academic work. Story 47. There was no character named Igor in the 1931 Universal production of Frankenstein. The hunchback character was named Fritz. There was a character named Igor in later sequels, but he was not a hunchback. He had his neck broken in a botched hanging. Frankenstein is the doctor, not the monster. Story 48. There are 4 types of bee, 1 male, the drone, and 3 females. Drones develop from unfertilized eggs. The difference among the 3 females is determined by what they are fed and how much space they have to develop. A queen receives abundant food and a large cell to grow in. A worker receives less food with a slightly different formulation and a small standard comb cell. The lack of nutrients and space means workers lack reproductive capabilities. There is also a rare type of worker that was fed a little too much or developed in a slightly larger cell. She can lay eggs. She is not a queen because she has not mated, so her eggs are all drones. She will run around the hive laying eggs while carefully avoiding the queen, because if the queen sees her in the act, she will kill her. Workers are always watching the queen. If she shows any weakness, they will start building queen cells to create competition. The queen will try to destroy those cells. When a new queen emerges, she and the old queen will likely fight. If one kills the other, life continues as usual. If the hive is crowded, the old queen will leave with many flying workers, which have loaded up on honey, to find a new home. Story 49. When you move into a higher tax bracket, only the income above the threshold is taxed at the higher rate. Income below the threshold is taxed at the lower rate. Story 50. Tyrannosaurus rex did not have loud footsteps. It likely had padded feet that helped muffle sound for ambushing. Tyrannosaurus rex did not rely on movement to see. It had good vision. Many dinosaurs could swim. Dilophosaurus did not have acidic spit or a flashy frill. It had crests on its skull. Stegosaurus's brain was not the size of a peanut. It was small for its body, roughly comparable to a dog's brain, and likely limited in intelligence. Brontosaurus was long considered the same as Apatosaurus, but recent studies have found differences that support Brontosaurus as a valid genus. Velociraptor was much smaller than often depicted in movies. It was about the size of a large turkey. Modern birds are descendants of theropod dinosaurs. Animals like pterodactyl and pteranodon were not dinosaurs. They were flying reptiles called pterosaurs. Mosasaurus and Dunkleistus were not dinosaurs. Mosasaurus was a marine reptile and Dunkleistus was an armored fish called a placoderm. Story 51. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation is not like in movies, when the person wakes up after receiving a few gentle compressions and a shock, then goes about their day. Real cardiopulmonary resuscitation is a brutal, rib-shattering ordeal that inevitably leads to a lengthy stay in the intensive care unit. In my career as an emergency room nurse, I have seen exactly one person survive an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Story 52. When massaging a sore muscle, you might think you should dig in until you feel it. Now, it sounds paradoxical, but whether you are massaging by hand or using a tool such as a massage gun, less pressure is better. Heavy pressure causes pain, which makes the muscle contract more tightly. Use light pressure until you feel the muscle start to relax, then apply slightly deeper pressure and repeat until the muscle has relaxed. Story 53. This is not safe for work. You cannot breathe with a penis in the throat. I know people complain about not being able to breathe when performing oral sex on someone with female genitalia, and that may be true, but the same applies to a penis. Anything deeper than a few inches usually means the person is holding their breath. If it contacts the back of the throat, the airway is closed. Many people with penises may be unaware of this because pornography rarely addresses it, which would spoil the fantasy. It is also considered bad form to complain while giving oral sex. I have seen fetish art showing a large gag or object extending to the back of the throat, and either the artist has never performed oral sex and does not realize the person could die in 2 to 3 minutes from oxygen deprivation, or the image depicts snuff. Remember that everyone needs to breathe, and a penis in the throat obstructs breathing. Story 54. Goats do not eat everything. Although they are curious and may sample items with their mouths, their stomachs are far more sensitive than people realize. Many common plants and foods are harmful, including rhododendron, which can be fatal. In castrated males, diets high in grain are especially dangerous and can lead to urinary tract blockages. Story 55. Many people believe that when lifting weights, low repetitions bulk you up and high repetitions tone you. In reality, anything between 5 and 30 repetitions will stimulate muscle growth, and there is no such thing as toning. That appearance results from building muscle and then dieting down to a low body fat percentage. The muscles look defined because there is very little body fat obscuring them. Story 56. Oh, so many things. Where do I start? These are some of the more egregious misconceptions I deal with often. Homeopathic remedies are not medicines and, by definition, will not treat anything because they contain no active ingredient. Homeopathic treatment is not the same as naturopathic medicine or home remedies. Some home remedies are supported by evidence, for example honey for a sore throat and ginger for an upset stomach. Others are not, such as putting onion or potato in your socks. Vaccines, antibiotics, antidepressants, and other medications are not the devil. Any active ingredient or intervention has risks and side effects. Even acetaminophen and even yoga carry risks. Whether those risks are worth it depends on your particular situation and what level of risk you are comfortable with. A vegan, gluten-free, raw, or other restrictive diet is not automatically healthy. A less processed, varied diet is healthier. I would be overjoyed if most people would at least eat a vegetable and take a walk every day. Oreos and carrots are both vegan, and chocolate and salmon are both gluten-free. Nutrition is more nuanced than avoid a whole food group. What benefits one person, such as a gluten-free diet for someone with celiac disease, might not work for another. If in doubt, see a registered dietitian. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation is not magic. It may be harmful and not beneficial for a 99-year-old with metastatic cancer. It will not reverse the underlying disease process. We are not miracle workers, and we are not trying to cause unnecessary suffering. Martial arts and mixed martial arts are valid sports. They are not glorifying violence any more than archery or fencing glorify war. They require skill and technique, participants consent to the activity, and they can be a lot of fun. I am sure I will think of more. Story 57. If your cat pees somewhere it should not, it is not doing it to punish you. It is communicating stress or medical issues. Story 58. I am still surprised how many adults truly believe ponies are just baby horses. Story 59. There honestly are not that many colored liquids in a chemistry lab. Source: American Chemist. Story 60. Yelling at your children may change their behavior, but not in the way you intend. They will not stop the behavior. They will only hide it better. They will not become more intelligent or suddenly understand a concept they could not grasp earlier. Instead, they may cheat or drop the class. Story 61. The Constitution only constrains government actions. If you are not challenging a government action, the First Amendment freedom of speech does not apply. Story 62. Recreational scuba diving. The tanks do not contain pure oxygen. They are filled with regular filtered air. Story 63. We do not excavate bodies solely to steal valuables. Most bodies are excavated because a freeway or other construction is planned over the site, and excavation is the only way to protect them from destruction. Story 64. Evolution is both a fact and a theory. Biological evolution, the change in the genetic characteristics of a population over time, is an observable fact. The study of the mechanisms by which evolution occurs is the theory of evolution by natural selection. There is no serious dispute within the scientific community. The consensus is that evolution is a fact. Multiple lines of direct, well-specified evidence support evolution to a high degree of certainty, and the evidence is extensive. For more information, consult the Talk Origins archive for compiled evidence and responses to common questions and arguments. After learning the basics, you may find a collection of videos on the systematic classification of life useful. 2 common misconceptions. 1. Microevolution versus macroevolution. Some accept small changes within a species but reject large changes that produce new species. In reality, the processes are the same. The principal difference is time. 2. A single individual giving birth to a new species. Speciation results from gradual genetic change in populations. When a segment of a population has changed so much that it can no longer reproduce successfully with the original population, speciation has occurred. Story 65. Blind people use the internet like sighted people. You would be surprised how many people ask, "How do you go online?" when they learn I am blind. Many people forget that keyboards exist. Text-to-speech and speech-to-text come standard on most phones. 90% of blind people still have some vision, even if it is only light perception. Only 10% see nothing at all. Blindness, like many conditions, is a spectrum. I still have some usable sight in my right eye in the dark, and my eyes look normal. You can be blind and have normal-looking eyes. You can also wake up blind. I did. It is rare but possible. One common cause is retinal detachment, which can be repaired surgically if treated promptly. My blindness is a light-sensitive form called acute zonal occult outer retinopathy, which has no known cause or cure. The leading theory is that my systemic immune system attacked the eye's immune environment and damaged the retinas. If that sounds nightmarish, it is. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, Technology, Entertainment, Design. Story 66. Taking a raise will never make you lose money. Even if you move into a higher tax bracket, you are only taxed on the additional income. Story 67. Swords are not heavy. I am learning the rapier, sidesword, long sword, and great sword. 5 kilograms or 11 pounds is about as heavy as they get, and those were unusual. I personally own 2 swords for sparring, and both weigh about 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. They take a lot of practice to use. That is not due to their weight. It is about the skill required. Story 68. Bernoulli's principle explains the low pressure on the top of an airfoil, but lift is produced mainly by the airfoil deflecting a large mass of air downward, as described by Newton's laws. Story 69. Some people seem to think that everyone has a gun in Switzerland. Others think that you cannot keep ammunition at home. Neither is true. Contrary to popular belief, civilians can own firearms in every country in Europe except the Vatican. The process and regulations vary by country, of course. It is obviously harder than in the United States, but it is often easier than people think. We simply have fewer guns because people are less interested in them. For example, the youngest person in the United Kingdom with a shotgun certificate in 2023 was 9 years old. At 14, they can shoot unsupervised. At 15, they can own one by themselves. Story 70. This is pedantic, so I usually try not to say anything. But as you asked, use embarrassed by or embarrassed about, not embarrassed of. Something is addictive, not addicting. You are wary of something, not weary of it. Although I agree I am wearied by this mistake. Also, as an admitted failure as a language learner, these gripes are aimed only at native English speakers. Yes, language evolves, and I deliberately disregard punctuation in online conversation, so who am I to care, etc. Story 71. Good parents raise bad children, and bad parents raise good children. It is not always linked to parental effort. Story 72. I am a high school counselor. The term bullying is overused a lot, especially in upper grades. I am not saying it does not happen. When it does, it is devastating. More often, issues between students are simply conflict. One student does not like another, acts rudely, and the other student responds in kind. If your child tells someone to go away and then gets punched, that is conflict. Bullying requires an imbalance of power, which is not often present. Many parents view their child as an innocent victim. Even when video footage shows their child doing something wrong, some parents will argue the video is not accurate. Story 73. People with schizophrenia are not often violent toward others. They are more likely to be violent toward themselves. Story 74. The American Civil War was about slavery. The leaders of the seceding states stated this explicitly. Story 75. One basic thing I have learned from many years in the linens trade is that thread count does not matter that much. Customers ask for the highest thread count, and when I show them 500 threads per square inch, they are surprised and ask how ours can compare to sheets advertised as 1,600 threads per square inch. Thread count snobbery was invented by the hotel industry and is mostly marketing. In cotton, you can realistically get about 300 threads per square inch of fabric. What matters is thread quality. Look for long staple cotton such as Egyptian or Pima, combed cotton to remove loose or broken fibers, and a thread count of 200 to 300 threads per square inch. A sateen weave produces a silkier sheet with a smoother hand but wrinkles more and is not ideal for warm weather. A percale weave is cooler, crisper, less likely to wrinkle, and breathes better for warm weather. A good 200 threads per square inch sheet will not pill. In fact, it is less likely to pill than higher thread count fabrics, and with proper laundering will last for 10 years or more. How can 1,000 or 1,600 threads per square inch sheets exist? Manufacturers take a single yarn, split it into multiple plies, and count each ply as a separate thread. Weaving 300 of these 4-ply yarns can be marketed as 1,600 threads per square inch. The result can be a silkier but more fragile sheet. To make your sheets last, avoid cheap, harsh detergents such as Tide or All. Use a mild baby soap such as Ivory Snow and wash in cold or warm water. Many sheets fade or tear because they are bleached or washed with harsh chemicals. Wash linens in mild soap, use cold or warm water, and a cool dryer setting. Have at least 2 sets of sheets to rotate so you can splurge on good bed linens and they will last for years. Story 76. People who reach the elite level of opera typically have the voice before college. In 32 years, I have never seen anyone train a poor young singer to that level. Those destined for the major stages reveal it on day 1 of freshman year. Most vocal performance programs are a scam. Story 77. There is no such thing as an alpha male. The hypothesis originated from a study by biologist L. David Meck of Captive Wolves. Once he realized his error, he spent his life trying to correct it, even attempting to remove his own books from shelves. He did not succeed, and the myth of the alpha male wolf persists. Today, it is often used to justify men behaving like jerks. Story 78. Cleopatra ruled Egypt at the beginning of the Roman Empire. She was not alive during the period most people call ancient Egypt, for example, when the pyramids were built. She was of Greek descent. In historical paintings, she has a classical Greek appearance. Pale skin and dark hair. Saying she was white is not racist or whitewashing because she probably was. A recent film about her prompted controversy for not casting an African actor, but she probably did not appear to be of African descent. Story 79. Toxic mold basically does not exist. It is a real term, but if you see black mold, it is 99.9% likely that it is no more dangerous than any other allergen. Every breath you have taken contains a mixture of mold spores, pollen, dust, human skin, bacteria, and insect droppings. I am a former basement waterproofer who is also asthmatic. I spent 10 years working in the moldiest and dustiest environments possible with no consequences. Toxic mold is one of the original clickbait topics. Story 80. Western forests need to be logged aggressively to get us out of the mess we have made through years of fire control. Story 81. There is a difference between mental health and neurological health. As someone with a neurological condition, I am not drooling on myself in a locked room. I, for instance, have served as a university professor and as a judge. Story 82. Everything is made of chemicals. If your liver and kidneys are functioning, most chemicals are not harmful. You can withstand a substantial exposure to many harmful chemicals if the exposure is short-term. Story 83. The word fuck does not stand for the phrase for unlawful carnal knowledge nor fornication under consent of the king. It has cognates in many other languages. Also, tips as in tipping your waiter does not stand for to ensure prompt service. Story 84. Horses do not, in fact, do all the work when you ride them. Please stop insulting the strength and skill it takes to convince an animal weighing more than 1,000 pounds to do what you want. Sincerely, my very sore thighs. Story 85. I am an insurance adjuster. I do not intend to cheat you on your claim. I have handled countless claims like yours, and such claims do not provoke a particular reaction from me unless they involve severe injury or death. Insurance is a heavily regulated industry. We are audited without notice 3 times a year by the Department of Insurance for our claims handling and business practices. If there were evidence that adjusters received large raises or bonuses because of money saved on claim payments, the company would face multimillion-dollar fines and could lose the right to operate in the affected states. When someone says they are retaining an attorney, I must refrain from offering a referral. I would prefer to speak with an attorney every day of the week. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.